Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Countdown, which is episode 23 of season 3 of Star Trek Enterprise. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my Patreon user polls. The episode to win my latest Patreon poll is Countdown. So Countdown is the episode where the Enterprise has to band together with members of the Xindi, specifically the Arboreals and the Primates, to try to stop the Xindi reptiles and insectoids from launching the weapon to destroy Earth. The reptilians had kidnapped Hoshi in an effort to decode the codes in order to operate the weapons, and Archer has to convince the Aquatics to join their forces to stop the reptilians, which they do manage to do, and they do manage to rescue Hoshi. However, with the help of the sphere builders, the reptilians succeed in launching the weapon towards Earth. Alright, so basically this is 2 out of 3 out of a 3-parter that ends season 3, that ends the Xindi story arc, which lasted for an entire season. Yeah, enjoying my kittens playing around behind me. So, and it's my favorite. It's one of my favorites of the Star Trek franchise. I absolutely love season 3. I talked about that a lot, and this is its crowning achievement. This is what makes season 3 so great. Because, you know, to be honest, if you look at season 3 of Enterprise as a whole, it is not paced very well. The first half of it takes way too long to get going. It has way too many side steps that don't really have to do with the main plot, and the main plot doesn't really kick in until we hit the episode Azadi Prime, which I just aired, which they aired as kind of like the mid-season finale, but really it's 3/4 of the way in. It's like episode 18, and even after we hit Azadi Prime, we still get the episode E2, which is another waste of time episode, so there's one throwaway episode even after that. So season 3 overall is not very well paced, but I still maintain that it is one of the best seasons of the entire Star Trek franchise because it really set up the story and really led it to this really exciting conclusion. And I talked about this a lot before about how this is what Star Trek is all about, because the whole season 3 premise was Enterprise needs to go into this expansion to stop these evil aliens from destroying Earth. But when you actually get to the season, it's more complex than that. It's not as simple as evil aliens. It's a complex society with a lot of different infightings and being manipulated by other aliens, and so Archer doesn't solve the situation. He doesn't save Earth by going in guns blazing and killing the bad guys. He saves Earth by negotiating, by finding out exactly who's being deceived and convincing them that their interests are actually allied, and that by destroying humanity, they'd be destroying themselves. And they come in this episode in particular, they come into agreement in order to save the Xindi and to save their space. And in return, the Xindi will help them save Earth from the other factions of Xindi. And then you have that complex situation where you have different factions of Xindis. You have the 5 different factions, and I love that. It's absolutely great. You got the Primates and Arboreals are really, really similar. They're both the good guys. There's differences between them, but they're really similar, and especially in terms of Archer negotiating. But then you have the Aquatics that are more they're the moderates. They're always the ones that are on the fence in between and can never decide and take a long time to decide anything, kind of like the Ents from Lord of the Rings. And so in this episode, Archer has to actually convince the Aquatics to join their side, which is a hard thing to do. And then there's the insectoids and reptilians, who are the more aggressive, agitated races, who more of, oh, let's just kill the humans. And they're both, before this episode, seen as kind of similar as well. But in this episode, you do see a distinguished difference, which I love, because the insectoids start to realize that because of the sphere builders, the Guardians helped the reptilians win the fight against the aquatics and the primates. The insectoids realize that the sphere builders, this actually builds Archer's claims that the sphere builders are controlling the spheres. The Guardians, the people they know as the Guardians, are controlling the spheres, and that is what's destroying the expanse. And so they start to see sense, and they realize that the Archer's actually right, but of course it comes too late because the reptilians just killed him. But it does show that even though the insectoids were seen as belligerent and warlike, they can still see reason, whereas the reptilians can't, or at least the commander of the reptilians. You can't lump them all in the same category, but the leadership, I should say. And I love that complexity. It's amazing, and this is why you need a season-long story arc, because you cannot delve in this kind of detail and complexity in just, you know, 1 or 2 episodes. You need like a whole lot of episodes, and even though it's not all of season 3, they didn't spend about at least half of season 3 on bullshit like westerns and some dude creeping on Hoshi and like the doctor being alone in a ship and having an obvious hallucination. I mean, we knew T'Pol was a hallucination the whole time. It's so fucking obvious. And other bullshit like that. But still, you wouldn't be able to build it up without, you know, really delving and really setting the stakes episode after episode. Earth is at stake, humanity's at stake. Archer has to do some crazy shit, some really immoral shit in order to save humanity, and it all builds up to this, where instead of simply killing the bad guys, he has to team up with different factions of the bad guys and help the bad guys to stop the better bad guys. And it's so good. Now, and that's the other thing when it comes particularly to this ending arc, because I once did a video where we with my sister and another guest, where we count down. We took the top 5 rated episodes of IMDb from each of the 5 Star Trek series: original, DS9, TNG, Voyager, and Enterprise. And this was one of them, but it actually just grouped Countdown and 0 Hour. It didn't have the Council in it, which I think is lacking, because this is actually a 3-parter, not a 2-parter. But anyway, so this guy who hadn't seen Enterprise, or only seen a little bit of it, watched just Countdown and 0 Hour, and he didn't like it. He rated it at the absolute bottom of his list, and which really upset me and my sister, because we had it up at like number 9, and we had it in our top 10 because we loved it. But that, to me, that just goes to show that you can't watch it out of context. And I did explain this to him, because he was a huge DS9 fan who loved the DS9 long-term story arcs they had with the Dominion War and taking over the station like that. And I did explain to him that it's a similar situation to that, because just like the Dominion War, if you just watch like the Sacrifice of Angels out of context, you're not going to really get that much enjoyment out of it. You have to see the greater context of the Dominion, the threat of Dominion, the backstory of Cisco and Gul Dukat, and everything leading up to it, and to fully appreciate it. And it's the same thing here with this 3-power. You need to see season 3. Well, not, you know, the bullshit episodes like the Western or whatnot, but the majority of season 3 that deals with the Xindi story arc, in order to get the full appreciation. And you especially need to see... Hold on. Sorry, my kitten knocked my camera loose. It froze my image. But anyway, you especially need to see the council, because that's the end of Dagra's story, and Dagra was an integral character. You can't just start after he's dead. And that's why really I see this as a three-parter, and I should have, when I did my episode review for it, I should have lumped all three episodes together, because I've done that in the past. I did that with the Circle trilogy over in DS9, and the trilogy that ended season 6 and began season 7 in DS9, and all the trilogies in season 4 of Enterprise, like the Vulcan one and the Algament ones. I reviewed those as one go. I should have actually done that with Council Countdown and 0 Hour, because really it's one three-parter. You can't just watch one individual. But I was kind of treating it the way I would treat other serialized shows like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad. Even though they're all lumped together, you can still pick out each episode, and that's what I did with the DS9, like the Station Takeover story arc and the Dominion War story arc that in season 7. I also did one episode at a time, so I was more treating it like that. But really, in retrospect, I think I should have treated it like a three-parter, because it is one, and just reviewed all three parts in one video. And so, and especially because of the out of order way that I do my reviews, because I don't, at the moment, it may change, but at the moment, I just review each episode completely out of order, depending on polls, like user polls or Patreon polls. And so I reviewed the episode The Council like 4 years ago, and then I reviewed the episode 0 Hour like 2 years ago, which The Council is the episode that came before this one. 0 Hour is the one that came after this one. And now I'm finally able to cover part 2, Countdown, which, because I own my Patreon channel, every month I do these polls for Star Trek episodes, and I choose which episodes, which is different from the ones I do on my channel for everyone else on my channel, for the whole public. For those polls, I like pick episodes at random, using like a random number generator website. But for my Patreon polls, I pick the episodes that I want to review, and I put Countdown on my polls so many times, because I put episodes that I want to review, and there's other episodes that I put on there repeatedly because I want to review them. But of course, it's out of 5, one from each of the Star Trek series, and Countdown has just always lost the poll until now. Finally won. So Countdown starts off where the council left off, where Hoshi's been kidnapped, and it mostly deals with Hoshi's abduction, which is really creepy. It is, and I find it like really powerful that Hoshi actually tried to kill herself rather than allow herself to be used to decode the weapon, like, because the weapon was going to be used to kill Earth, to destroy all of humanity. And it makes sense that she would rather die than be the instrument that destroys her own race, that destroys the human race. But it's a different thing to know something intellectually, and it's another thing to actually do it. And I think it speaks really extremely highly of her character and how much she's grown, because at the start of the season, she probably would have been too scared to do something like this. She was shown as basically an amateur who had no business being out in space, but she's had this journey, and all the characters, by the way, and I talked about this in my other reviews, their character were explored more in season 3, because before that they were flat uninteresting. Who cares about boring characters? And there's still some aspects of that. Even when I'm watching this episode, I see that 50s aspect of the Brennan Braga thing that he set up that I fucking hate. But Manny Koto did, especially in season 4, but started in season 3, did manage to take these flat and boring characters and make them more interesting and start to flesh them out more. You get that with Hoshi in this episode, with her trying to kill herself, which I think was a huge deal, and her at first being extremely resistant to the reptilian brainwashing, but then of course the reptilians just added another treatment, and that time it worked, but it almost completely destroyed her brain. They deal with this a bit more in the next episode, when she's having to destroy the weapon, but she's been traumatized by the events of this episode, which is it's really powerful stuff. But the other like good character story in this episode is Reed. I think they show a lot of character growth with Lieutenant Reed because they had the story arc throughout season 3. And again, this is why long-term storytelling and serialized storytelling works. Granted, fucking Discovery and Picard butchered it and didn't do it properly all the time. But if it is done properly, such as in this season, that's even with all those wasted time episodes, it works. It helps build the character stories. You have the arcs. In this case, you had a long-term arc with the Makos and how he was feuding with the main guy, Major Hayes, the commander, and one episode they got into an actual fist fight, which I thought was a stupid episode. Again, it was one of those wasted time episodes, but it did at least build that character story, and you see it here because in the previous episode, the Council, Reed went off on a mission with one of the Makos, Hawkins, who died. And in this episode, you deal with the consequences of it. They don't treat it like, oh, this is another red shirt. They treat and that's what I love about Enterprise, particularly season 3. They treat every single death as vital, as important, as if it was a main character. This is another episode this season. The Forgotten dealt with this as well. Unlike the original series where, red shirts, who cares? Who gives a fuck? Which always irked me. But there's no red shirtism here in this show, and that's what I really like. And so this deals with it with Hawkins and how there's kind of a rift between Reed and Hayes, because Hayes was not comfortable with the fact that he lent one of his men to Reed, and then Reed got him killed, basically. But Reed tried to assure him, like, look, I did everything I can. He's like, I know you did. And they sort of reconcile. They had this moment where they reconcile where Hayes is like, look, when I first came on board, we were very alienated. We didn't feel like we were part of the crew. And Reed says, oh, if I contributed to that, I apologize. And Reed, I'm sorry, you totally did. Absolutely contributed to that. But at least he is apologizing to it now. But then Hayes is like, but the point is, we don't feel like that way now. Now we feel like we're part of the crew, and we will go rescue Ensign Sato. We will bring her back. Like, powerful stuff. But then it gets even more powerful when on the mission to rescue Hoshi, they do succeed in rescuing her, but Major Hayes dies. And this was an extremely powerful death, even though, he was a somewhat main character. He was more of a recurring character. He wasn't that big of a deal. But his death was really powerful, and it really hit you. And this is what I always say, things that happen in fiction affect the audience as much as they affect the characters, which is why the whole bullshit about red shirts, because the characters don't give a fuck, so the audience isn't going to give a fuck. But when the characters really, really care, and you can tell how affected Reed was by Hayes' death in the scene in sickbay where Hayes is dying, and Hayes knows he's dying. He's like, use Corporal What's-Her-Face, she knows her team, and Reed doesn't want to meet. He's like, no, we'll have none of that talk, and then Hayes just dies right immediately, and the look of shock on Reed's face is so powerful. And that scene where Reed goes to the Makos and has to tell them that the commander has died, it was such a powerful scene. It was such a heartbreaking, such a great scene. And the way, because he's going on this dangerous mission with Archer. They're going on Dagra's ship to try to stop the weapon, and this happens in the next episode. I think most of the Makos die in that episode, if I remember, at least 2 or 3 of them, I think. But anyway, he asks for 3 volunteers to go with him. He's like, Major Hayes handpicked you, he believed in you, so I believe in you, and I want 3 of you to volunteer to come with me. And they all volunteer. Now here's the thing. We've had this cliche in Star Trek a lot, where they ask for volunteers and everyone volunteers, and usually this cliche really, really pisses me off. I'm thinking of There was the DS9 episode, The Siege, which was part of the Circle trilogy, where they went. Cisco asked for volunteers to violate Starfleet orders to stay behind on Deep Space Nine during when the Bajor was reclaiming the radical faction of Bajor was reclaiming the station, and everyone volunteered. I'm like, no, they wouldn't. And then what's even worse was the Voyager episode, the 37s, where they find this colony of humans in the Delta Quadrant, and they have the option of staying behind on this nice, luxurious colony rather than going in a starship that's constantly being attacked and running out of resources that's probably never going to get back to Earth. And nobody volunteers to go to the colony. Everyone decides to stay on Voyager. Bullshit they did. That was total horseshit. That aggravated me so much. That is so unrealistic. It was more realistic. I always think about the Battlestar Galactica, like this finale. I think it was the finale, or towards the finale, the final episode of the season, where they're going on this dangerous mission to attack the Cylons. I think just to rescue one person. And he asked for volunteers, and not everyone volunteers. Only like half the crew volunteers. I'm like, that's fucking realistic, because not everyone's going to volunteer for that. But this is the one case where I do buy everyone would volunteer for this mission, because these are all, but for one thing, there's only like 13 of them, so it's not like a crew of 50 or 100 like the other cases in DS9 and Voyager, or 200. It's just 13 guys and gals, and they've all been really have like intense training. They're all like badass military soldiers, and so he's asking them to go on a dangerous mission, which is exactly what they've been trained for. Right after, by the way, telling them that their commander has died and believed in them. Of course they're all gonna fucking volunteer. In fact, it was touching when they all volunteered. It was almost brought a tear to my eye. And then Reed just chooses 3 of them. I don't know how he chooses these 3 at random, whatever. You come. Why didn't he take all of them? I guess that doesn't make sense. It seemed like there was plenty of room on Dager's ship, but I suppose they had to leave some behind because Enterprise was going off on its own dangerous mission. But it wasn't. Its mission didn't really involve hand-to-hand combat as much. Although I think there was examples where they did have to. The sphere builders were like beaming aboard and doing the bullshit, but the Makos couldn't really do anything about it anyway. But anyway, point is, I think he should have taken half of them at least, not just 3. It seems like he would have needed them more, but whatever. And so yes, the point is that was an extremely powerful scene that I absolutely loved. And other than that, like in this episode, I just loved getting all of the politics. It continues from the episode of the Council, which I loved for its internal politics in the Xindi, and that continued in this episode, where basically Arboreals and that one dude who was been in a couple episodes of Voyager, who was I guess he was like the leader of the primates, because Dager was like a scientist, but him and the Arboreal dude were like totally on Team Archer by this point. Like they were completely on his side, especially after the reptilians killed Dager. Like that was the last straw. But so seeing them totally on the same side, but they're still outnumbered because the fucking reptilians and insectoid ships are more powerful than theirs. They needed the help of the aquatics, and the aquatics were like, the Ents who won't decide, and they're very indecisive, and so you have Archer having to plead his case to the aquatics, and you had that, a lot of people like to bitch about the visual effects in the aquatics. I think they're being nitpicky. It looks fine to me. I mean, it's not up. This came out like 20 some years ago or something, so obviously it's not up to modern day standards. But it's good enough. Like, it's not as cheesy as watching the original series and seeing a dog with antlers stapled to his head, or like a guy in a college mascot dressed up as a reptile going "Rah, rah." It's fine. I got no issue with it. And it was cool seeing him confront the Aquatics, and Aquatics come up with a translator. They're able to speak to the view where you can hear the, this whale-like noises that they make going, "Ooh," but then that robotic translator voice going, "It is okay, we can understand each other now." Like, it brought an extra sort of eeriness to it that I love. And I love that, at first they were very standoffish. They didn't want to listen to Archer, and Archer had to plead with them, and the way he convinced them was that, because they still weren't convinced that the Guardians were actually behind building the spheres and were trying to destroy the Expanse and deceiving them into destroying Earth in order to destroy themselves, which was the ultimate deal. And Archer had to be like, look, did the Guardians ever offer to destroy the spheres for you? Because I will destroy the spheres for you. And that got their attention, and that got them to agree. But what I love about that is Archer was kind of bullshitting. he was talking out of his ass, because they actually didn't at that stage have a means to destroy the spheres, and T'Pol and Trip were working on it, and he went to them as like, you better find a way to destroy these spheres. And Trip was like, well, I hope you didn't promise them that we could do it. And Archer's like, you better come up with a solution. This is like, yeah, I did. And he had to in order to get them on the side. But of course, this is TV, so Trip and T'Pol do pull through and come up with a way to destroy the spheres, thankfully. Otherwise, Archer would have been screwed. And then we get the big battle. This is the, out of the 3 parts, this is the 2-part. This is the part that has like the huge battle. Although there's another battle in 0 Hour, which with the Andorians helping Dago's ship destroy the weapon. But really, that was more of like the internal fighting that takes place on the ship. This is the real ship battle that occurs in this episode, where we have the aquatic fleet along with the arboreals and the primates attacking the insectoids and the reptilians, like the 5 different factions of the Xindi clashing in the Enterprise in the middle of it. It's pretty fucking awesome. It's probably the best space battle in the entire show. And then the Guardians of the Sphere Builders do interfere towards the end because they're about to lose the battle. And I think having that interjection of, even though these Sphere Builders do come off a lot like a ripoff of the Changelings. I'm sorry, they do. Their makeup is so similar. But especially the female Changeling, the way that the leader of this is a female, just like the female Changeling. But anyway, it added a huge sense of eeriness to have whenever they showed those scenes of like the Sphere Builders in that weird void. They're just sitting there and just standing there around in this white void, being like, the timelines. It had this like very eerie, very like British sci-fi feel to it. It felt very dark, and it really helped sort of add to the tension of the episode, where like the timelines are showing the humans are going, it's favoring the humans now, we must intercede. And they don't really talk like that. I don't know why I was talking like that, but anyway, it was cool. And I think it added to the tension. And then they did interfere, and you see this like giant aquatic ship, like such a beautiful, like great special effects scene where it just destroys and falls apart. And you see like water flying out of the ship. It was fucking cool. And that's when they realized that the Sphere Builders are interfering. And this is, I already talked about how the insectoids are like, hey, wait a minute, like they use the spheres to help us, so Archer's right. They're fucking trying to kill us. We shouldn't do this. But the reptilians are like all power hungry because the Guardians have offered them, power over the Xindi if they help them. And I do buy Commander Dolan as a character as being a very corrupt, power hungry, just bad guy. And I think they give him some backstory too that sort of sells this. So I don't think he comes off as a two-dimensional villain, even though, and he's played by a great actor. He's in episodes like Face of the Enemy, which I reviewed recently, where he played the Roman in the back, and he was played a Jemadar in this one episode too. So he's a really good actor, so he does help sell it. But the costumes look ridiculous. I talked about this before. The Xindi costume, especially the reptilians, they'd look just ridiculous. But it's still absolutely amazing episode. Hold on, give me 1 second. My computer's gonna lose connection somewhere. There we go. All right, sorry. So yes. This was like the linchpin. This was the part 2. This was the Empire Strikes Back, dare I say, of this 3-parter. And I think it serves that purpose. It helps ramp up the tension from the end of the first part, which was really exciting shit. The Council is still my favorite of the 3-parter, but as I said, I kind of like this as the whole 3-parter. Like when I did my first top 10 Enterprise episodes, I just counted this all 3 episodes as one, and this was my number 2, second favorite episode of the entire show. When I split them up, I did a top 30 Enterprise episodes, and I split each episode up. I think 0 Hour is my number 6, this is my number 5, and the Council is my number 2. So they're still these are my favorite episodes. And as I said, and they're still my favorite of the entire Star Trek franchise, because this is serialized storytelling at its best. It is, they built up, they earned this, they earned the character arcs, they earned this complex political system, which to me is actually, and I've said this before, you can give me shit all you want, I like this better than Best of Both Worlds. To me, the Xindi are more interesting villain than the Borg, because rather than just being an evil totalitarian bad guys that's unstoppable and kind of, let's be honest here, two-dimensional, the Xindi are a complex society of all these different species and all these different ways with their own politics, their own infighting, and so Archer's the way to get them to stop them from destroying Earth wasn't simply, we gotta destroy them or find some bullshit solution like putting them to sleep, which actually doesn't make any practical sense. They had to do infighting, politicals, politics, and convincing and negotiating, and even then they had to get down and dirty with the, you get the big action shot of Archer in the next episode. And so I love that. To me, that is way more interesting. That's why I absolutely love season 3 of Enterprise. Particularly these 3 episodes is what really holds it up, and why it's some of my favorites of the entire Star Trek franchise. So my rating for Countdown out of 10 is, of course, a 10, the best. One of the best episodes of the show. Period. Great second part to a great trilogy. So that is it for my review of Countdown. Thanks so much for watching this. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos, as well as covering lots of other shows like Westworld, The Expanse, Better Call Saul, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.